The elderly man hunched forward in his orange jumpsuit, hands trembling as he gripped the defendant's table, while jeers and whispers rippled through the crowded courthouse. His weathered face bore the weight of decades, but there was something in those faded blue eyes, a distant echo of strength that even prison clothes couldn't quite hide, that made Judge Harrison pause mid-sentence when the bailiff read the name Colonel James McKinley from the arrest report. No one saw the color drain from Judge Harrison's face, or noticed how his hand instinctively moved to touch the faded photograph he'd carried in his wallet for 40 years. What dark secret from a battlefield half a world away connected these two men, and why did the judge suddenly order the courtroom cleared? Subscribe to our channel for more stories of forgotten heroes whose true identity changes everything in a single moment. The humid air of Saigon clung to Lieutenant Michael Harrison's uniform as he stepped off the military transport in the summer of 1968. The 23-year-old officer had been in Vietnam for less than an hour, but already the weight of command pressed down on his shoulders like the oppressive heat. His orders were clear: report to Colonel James McKinley, commanding officer of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. The colonel's reputation had preceded him. Stories circulated through the ranks about his tactical brilliance, his unwavering courage under fire, and most importantly, his dedication to bringing every single one of his men home. McKinley's men don't die, the saying went among the troops. They just find new ways to fight. Harrison found the colonel in a makeshift command center, bent over maps spread across a wooden table. Despite the suffocating temperature, McKinley's uniform was pristine, his posture ramrod straight. He didn't look up when Harrison entered, too focused on the colored pins marking enemy positions across the jungle terrain. "Sir, Lieutenant Harrison, reporting as ordered," the young officer announced, snapping to attention. McKinley finally looked up, and Harrison felt those piercing blue eyes studying him, measuring his worth in seconds. "At ease, Lieutenant. Tell me, what's the most important thing a commander needs to know?" Harrison hesitated, mind racing through his training at officer candidate school. "The enemy's position, sir." A slight smile crossed McKinley's weathered face. "Wrong. It's knowing the weight of the decisions you make. Every order you give could send good men to their deaths. You have to be ready to carry that weight." He gestured to the map. "We're moving out at dawn. Operation Crimson Strike. Your platoon will be taking point." The next 12 hours were a blur of preparation, equipment checks, and briefings. Harrison watched in amazement as McKinley personally inspected every unit, knew every soldier's name, asked about their families. It wasn't just leadership, it was something deeper, a connection that transcended rank and protocol. That night, unable to sleep in the stifling heat, Harrison found McKinley still at his post, radio reports crackling in the background. The colonel was writing letters, not official reports, but personal messages to the families of fallen soldiers. "You know why I write these myself, Lieutenant?" McKinley asked, without looking up. "No, sir. Because every man under my command is my responsibility. Their lives, their deaths, their legacy. It all comes back to the choices we make as leaders." He sealed another envelope. "Remember that, Harrison. The wait doesn't end when the iceberg fighting stops." Dawn approached with the promise of violence hanging in the air. As Harrison prepared his platoon, he saw McKinley making his final rounds, that same quiet strength emanating from him. None of them knew that in less than 48 hours everything would change. None of them could have predicted that the next firefight would forge a bond between the young lieutenant and his colonel that would echo across decades. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the jungle canopy, Harrison caught a glimpse of something in McKinley's eyes. Not fear, not uncertainty, but a deep, unwavering resolve. It was the look of a man who understood exactly what was at stake, who carried the weight of command not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. "Move out," McKinley ordered, and the jungle swallowed them whole. Operation Crimson Strike had gone smoothly for the first 36 hours. Too smoothly, as McKinley would later write in his report. Harrison's platoon had successfully navigated through 3 clicks of dense jungle. encountering only tokens, resistance. But as the sun began to set on their second day, the comfortable rhythm of their advance was shattered by the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire. The first burst caught them in a narrow valley, bullets spitting from concealed positions on both ridge lines. Harrison's men dove for cover, but the killing zone had been perfectly planned. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to maneuver. The enemy had been waiting, and they'd walked right into the trap. Contact front, contact right, contact left. The shouts merged with the cacophony of gunfire and the sharp metallic ping of rounds hitting rocks around them. Harrison's radio man was hit in the first volley, the radio destroyed by the same burst that wounded him. Through the chaos, Harrison heard McKinley's voice on the command net. All units, hold position. Do not advance. Repeat, do not advance. The colonel's voice was steady, methodical, as if he were conducting a training exercise rather than fighting for survival. The firefight intensified. Harrison counted at least 30 enemy positions, maybe more. His platoon was pinned down, taking casualties with no way to call for air support. The sun was setting fast, and in the darkness, the NVA would have every advantage. That's when McKinley made his decision. The colonel appeared beside Harrison's position, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his age. "Lieutenant, I need your best runners. 2 men who can move fast and quiet." Harrison nodded, calling forward Privates Rodriguez and Thompson. McKinley pulled a crumpled map from his pocket, marking it quickly with a grease pencil. "There's a Marine artillery battery 3 clicks southeast. Get there, get them on the horn, and bring the rain. The rest of us will keep Charlie's attention right here." As the runners disappeared into the jungle, McKinley turned to Harrison. "Now, Lieutenant, we're going to teach these boys how Marines fight when they're cornered." What followed would become legend in the regiment. McKinley organized the remaining men into 3-man teams, each providing covering fire for the others as they leapfrogged between positions. The constant movement made their force seem larger than it was, confusing the enemy's targeting. But it wasn't enough. The NVA were pressing closer and ammunition was running low. Night had fallen and still no word from the runners. That's when McKinley made his second decision of the night, the one that would haunt Harrison's dreams for decades to come. "Listen carefully, Lieutenant," McKinley said, his voice barely audible above the gunfire. "When I give the signal, you'll lead the men south through that draw. It's narrow, but it's covered. You'll have exactly 3 minutes to get everyone out." Harrison stared at him. "What signal, sir? And what about you?" McKinley smiled that same slight smile from their first meeting. "You'll know it when you see it. Just remember what I told you about the weight of command. Sometimes one man's weight can save many." Before Harrison could protest, McKinley was gone, moving through the darkness with his rifle and what looked like several grenades. 5 minutes later, a massive explosion rocked the northern ridgeline, followed by another and another. In the chaos that followed, Harrison saw McKinley sprinting across open ground, drawing fire, keeping the enemy's attention focused entirely on him. "Move, move, move!" Harrison ordered, and his men didn't hesitate. They slipped through the draw, while McKinley's one-man war raged above them. Every Marine made it through. 23 men saved by one colonel's sacrifice. They found McKinley an hour later, after the artillery finally arrived. He was wounded in 3 places, but still conscious, still gripping his rifle. When the medics reached him, he asked only one question. "Did they all make it out, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir," Harrison answered, his voice thick with emotion. "Every single one." McKinley nodded once and finally allowed himself to be evacuated. He would spend 6 weeks in a military hospital, earn a Silver Star that he'd never talked about, and return to command as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Harrison never forgot. How could he? He'd watched a man willingly walk into hell to save his troops, had seen courage that defied explanation. The weight of that night, of that lesson in leadership, would stay with him forever. Now, 40 years later, that same man stood before him in a courtroom, wearing prison orange instead. of Marine Green, and Judge Michael Harrison had a decision to make. The years had not been kind to Colonel James McKinley. After Vietnam, he'd tried to adjust to civilian life like thousands of other veterans. But the memories followed him like shadows. The sound of a car backfiring would send him diving for cover. The smell of diesel fuel brought back the acrid stench of burning jungle. Even rain against windows reminded him of nights spent listening for enemy movement. In the dark, he'd found work as a security consultant, then as a night watchman, and finally as a janitor at the local high school. Each job a step down from the last, but McKinley never complained. He did his work with the same quiet dignity he'd shown in combat, even when teenagers mocked his shuffling gait or the way his hands sometimes trembled. His small apartment on the outskirts of town became his fortress. Newspapers piled up in neat stacks, each one containing another story about veterans being forgotten, about benefits being denied, about promises unkept. He kept his medals in a shoebox under his bed, never displayed them, never spoke of them. The Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart gathered dust while their owners swept floors and cleaned bathrooms. The nightmares came most nights. He'd wake up shouting orders to men long dead, their names still fresh on his lips. During these episodes, he'd pace his apartment until dawn, reciting the names of every Marine who'd served under his command. It was his private ritual, his way of carrying their weight, just as he'd taught young Lieutenant Harrison so many years ago. The incident that led to his arrest happened on a Tuesday evening at the Crown Diner, where McKinley occasionally treated himself to coffee and pie. He sat in his usual corner booth, watching the world through windows streaked with rain, when three young men walked in. They were loud, aggressive, already drunk despite the early hour. McKinley kept his head down, focused on his coffee, but he could feel their attention turned to him. The youngest one, barely 20, started first. "Hey, old-timer, that's our booth. You're in our spot." Any other day, McKinley would have quietly left. But that morning, he'd received notice that his VA benefits were being reduced again. The letter had reopened old wounds, brought back memories he'd fought to suppress. His hands were already shaking when the young man grabbed his shoulder. What happened next would be disputed by every witness in the diner. Some said McKinley attacked first. Others swore the young men threw the first punch. The security camera footage was grainy, inconclusive. What was clear was that when it was over, all three young men were on the ground, one with a broken arm, and McKinley stood absolutely still, his breathing steady, his movements controlled, a glimpse of the warrior he'd once been. The responding officers found him sitting calmly in his booth, finishing his coffee. He offered no resistance, made no excuses. When they asked for his name, he gave it quietly, along with his service number, a habit from another lifetime. They charged him with assault, set his bail higher than he could afford, and sent him to county lockup to await trial. In his cell, McKinley returned to his nightly ritual, whispering the names of his men into the darkness. He added new names now, the young men from the diner, not in anger or resentment, but as part of his burden, part of the weight he carried. In his mind, they were just more souls he'd failed to protect, more evidence of his inability to adjust to a world that had moved on without him. The public defender assigned to his case urged him to plead guilty, to throw himself on the mercy of the court. McKinley listened politely but said nothing. When asked about his military service, about the medals gathering dust in his apartment, he changed the subject. The weight of command, he'd learned, included knowing when to keep silent. None of them knew that fate had arranged for his case to appear before Judge Michael Harrison. None of them could have predicted that a night of sacrifice in a Vietnamese jungle would echo across decades to intersect with this moment of justice. As McKinley was led into the courtroom in his orange jumpsuit, he was thinking only of surviving another day, of carrying his weight with dignity. The old Marine straightened his back as much as his aging body would allow, ready to face whatever came next. Just as he had in countless other moments of crisis, James McKinley prepared himself to stand alone. Judge Michael Harrison's hands trembled as he closed his chamber doors, the weight of the morning's revelation pressing down on him like a physical force. He collapsed into his leather chair, fingers instinctively reaching for his wallet, not for money or credit cards, but for the worn photograph he'd carried for 4 decades. The image was faded now, its corners soft from countless touches. A group of Marines stood before a battle-worn helicopter, their faces young and dirty, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and pride. In the center stood Colonel McKinley, his arm around a much younger Lieutenant Harrison. The date scrawled on the back read, 2 days after Crimson Strike, 1968. Harrison spread the photograph on his desk, next to the arrest report, bearing McKinley's name. The contrast was jarring. The proud Marine colonel from his memories and the elderly defendant in his courtroom seemed like different men entirely. Yet those eyes remained unchanged, still carrying that same quiet strength Harrison had witnessed in the jungle. "Your Honor," his clerk's voice crackled through the intercom. "The DA's office is asking about the McKinley case. They want to know why you cleared the courtroom." Harrison pressed the intercom button. "Tell them I'll have a decision shortly." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, distant and hollow. He turned to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard as he searched military records. McKinley's service history appeared on the screen. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Combat V, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, combat tours spanning 3 decades, hundreds of lives saved, but the official records told only part of the story. Harrison opened his bottom desk drawer, pulling out a leather-bound journal he'd kept during his tour. He'd documented everything about that night in the jungle, trying to make sense of what he'd witnessed. One passage stood out, written in the shaky handwriting of his younger self. "The colonel saved us all tonight. I watched him run straight into enemy fire, drawing their attention so we could escape. They don't make medals for the kind of courage I saw. How do you reward a man who literally walks into hell to save his men?" A knock at the door interrupted his reading. "Come in," he called, quickly tucking the photograph back into his wallet. His senior clerk entered, carrying a stack of files. "Sir, I've pulled everything we have on the assault charges. 3 complainants, all with prior records. Security footage from the diner is inconclusive, but there's something else." She hesitated. "The VA office sent over some records. Colonel McKinley's benefits were cut again last month. They cited insufficient documentation of his service-connected disabilities." Harrison felt a surge of anger. The same system McKinley had served so faithfully was now turning its back on him. The irony was bitter. A decorated Marine officer reduced to fighting for basic recognition of his sacrifices. "Get me Judge Peterson on the phone," Harrison ordered, "and find out who's handling McKinley's VA appeals. I want to know everything about his case." As his clerk hurried out, Harrison returned to the photograph. He remembered McKinley's words from so long ago. "The wait doesn't end when the fighting stops." How true those words had proven to be, not just for the colonel, but for all of them who'd served. Harrison stood, moving to the window overlooking the courthouse square. Below, life continued its normal rhythm, people hurrying to and from the building, oblivious to the drama unfolding in his chambers. How many other veterans walked among them, he wondered, carrying their own invisible wounds, fighting battles no one else could see. The decision before him was complex. As a judge, he had sworn to uphold the law without bias or favor, but he also carried another oath, one taken in a jungle clearing while mortars exploded overhead, an oath to never abandon his fellow Marines. His intercom buzzed again. "Judge Peterson on line 1, sir." Harrison squared his shoulders, drawing strength from decades of judicial experience. "Thank you. And Sarah, clear my afternoon calendar. Every case except McKinley's gets continued." He lifted the phone, his resolve hardening. The colonel had once carried the weight of command to save his men. Now it was Harrison's turn to carry a different kind of weight, the weight of justice, tempered by honor and debt long unpaid. The photograph lay open on his desk, a silent witness to the past as he began to forge a path toward redemption in the present. Sarah Chen had been Judge Harrison's senior clerk for 7 years, but she'd never seen him so focused, so driven. The afternoon stretched into evening as they dug deeper into Colonel McKinley's past, uncovering a trail of bureaucratic failures that made her blood boil. "Look at this," she said, spreading documents across the conference table. His Silver Star citation was never properly recorded. The paperwork got lost during a base closure in '75. So when he applied for veterans benefits in 2010, there was no digital record of his highest decoration. Harrison leaned forward, studying the faded carbon copies, and without the Silver Star documentation, they classified him at a lower disability rating, Sarah finished. He's been getting about half of what he's entitled to for 15 years. But it gets worse. She pulled up another file on her laptop. 3 separate VA hospitals have diagnosed him with severe PTSD. But because his combat records were partially destroyed in a fire at the National Personnel Record Center, they kept demanding more proof of his service-connected trauma. Harrison's jaw tightened. More proof? The man led a battalion in Vietnam. He's got 3 Purple Hearts, which aren't in the digital system either, Sarah added. I had to call the Marine Corps Museum to confirm they're real. They have photographs of the actual award ceremonies, but somehow none of it made it into the modern databases. The judge stood, pacing the length of his chambers. So we have a decorated Marine officer, a man who saved 23 lives in a single night, being treated like he's making it all up. No wonder he stopped fighting the system. Sarah nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. But here's where it gets interesting. I found his original commanding officer, General Matthews. He's retired now, living in Florida. When I told him about Colonel McKinley's situation, he nearly had a heart attack. He's been making calls all afternoon. The phone on Harrison's desk buzzed. Sarah answered it, her eyes widening as she listened. "Sir, the Pentagon's Judge Advocate General's office is on the line. They're sending over McKinley's complete service record, the classified versions. For the next 2 hours, they pieced together the full scope of James McKinley's military career. Beyond the known combat decorations lay a history of classified operations, diplomatic missions, and acts of valor that had been deliberately kept out of public records." "He wasn't just a battalion commander," Harrison muttered, reading through the newly arrived files. "He was part of a special operations group. Half his missions were so secret they created fake paperwork to cover his real location." Sarah pointed to a particular document. "This explains why he never pushed back against the VA. Look at the oath he signed in '69. Even after retirement, he was bound by security classifications. He couldn't tell them what really happened because most of it was still classified." Harrison sank into his chair, the weight of discovery heavy on his shoulders. All these years he kept his silence, lived in poverty, rather than break his word, and we let him down. The whole system let him down. A soft knock interrupted them. Harrison's bailiff stepped in, looking uncomfortable. "Sorry to interrupt, Your Honor, but you need to see this. The 3 complainants in the assault case, they just withdrew their statements, said they want to change their story." Sarah was already pulling up the diner's security footage. "I enhanced the video. Watch what happens before the altercation." The grainy footage showed the 3 young men surrounding McKinley's booth. One of them clearly threw the first punch. McKinley's response was purely defensive, textbook Marine Corps hand-to-hand combat techniques executed with minimal force. "He was protecting himself," Harrison said softly. "Even then, he showed restraint. Could have done much worse." "Sir?" Sarah's voice had a note of urgency. "There's something else. Remember how the VA kept rejecting his PTSD claims? I found out why he was at the diner that night. Every Tuesday, he meets with other veterans there. Unofficial group therapy. He pays for their coffee, listens to their problems. The owner says he's been doing it for years." Harrison stared at the pile of documents before him. The visible proof of a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and silent suffering. In his mind, He heard McKinley's voice from long ago. "The wait doesn't end when the fighting stops." "No," he whispered. "But maybe it's time someone helped him carry it." He turned to Sarah. "Get me the DA's office now, and find out who's the highest-ranking Marine officer within 100 miles. It's time we started fixing 4 decades of mistakes." The sun had set outside his chambers, but Harrison showed no signs of stopping. There was too much work to do, too many wrongs to right. The ghosts of Vietnam were about to meet the machinery of modern justice, and this time, Colonel James McKinley wouldn't be fighting alone. The first call came at dawn. A retired Marine sergeant in Oregon had seen McKinley's name in a veteran's Facebook group. By noon, Judge Harrison's office had received 17 more calls. By sunset, the number had grown to 53. They were coming out of the woodwork. Marines who'd served under Colonel McKinley, soldiers whose lives he'd touched, families who owed him everything. "My father was one of the 23, said a woman from Texas, her voice breaking over. The speakerphone in Harrison's chambers. "He used to tell us about the colonel who ran through enemy fire to save his platoon. Dad passed last year, but he never forgot. Never stopped telling that story." Another veteran, now a grandfather in Florida, had a different memory to share. "December '69, near the Cambodian border. Our chopper went down in bad territory. Every other unit was ordered to stand down due to weather. But Colonel McKinley? He took his men out anyway. Walked through a monsoon to find us. Lost 2 good men in the rescue, but he brought the rest of us home." The stories kept coming. A former corpsman recalled McKinley donating blood in the field, keeping a wounded Marine alive until evacuation arrived. A radio man remembered him, standing exposed to enemy fire, calmly calling in artillery coordinates while bullets riddled the air around him. "He recommended me for officer training," said a retired major from Michigan. "Back then, there weren't many black officers in the Corps. Some folks didn't like it. But the colonel told them if they had a problem with me, they had a problem with him. He stood by me, sir. Now it's our turn to stand by him." Harrison's clerk had set up a command center in the law library, coordinating with veterans groups across the country. Marine Corps networks hummed with activity as the word spread. One of their own needed help. By mid-afternoon, 3 former members of McKinley's battalion had arrived at the courthouse. They sat in Harrison's chambers, their aged faces lined with concern and determination. Master Sergeant James "Doc" Wilson, the battalion's former medical corpsman, spread out old photographs on the judge's desk. "This was taken right after Crimson Strike," he said, pointing to a group shot. "Look at the colonel's uniform, 3 bullet holes, but he refused evacuation until every wounded man was out. Beside him, Corporal Tommy Martinez, now walking with a cane, added his own memories. You know what he did with his Silver Star money? Sent it to the widow of one of our guys. Did it anonymously, but we all knew. That's who he was, who he still is." The third veteran, Sergeant Major William O'Brien, had driven through the night from Tennessee. "Permission to speak freely, Your Honor?" Harrison nodded, recognizing the formal military courtesy. "This ain't just about the colonel. It's about all of us. Every veteran who came home to find the world had moved on without them. Every hero who ended up forgotten. The colonel, he never left anyone behind in combat. Never. And now it's our turn to complete the mission." O'Brien pulled out his phone, showing Harrison a rapidly growing online campaign. Veterans across the country were sharing McKinley's story, offering support, demanding justice. "Never forget McKinley" was trending on multiple platforms. "We've got Marines from 3 generations mobilizing, sir," Martinez said. "Vietnam vets, Gulf War guys, kids who just got back from Afghanistan. The colonel might think he's alone, but he's about to find out." Different? A young Marine captain in dress blues appeared at the chamber door. "Sir, there's a General Thompson here to see you. Says he flew in from Quantico as soon as he heard." Harrison stood, straightening his robes. "Show him in." The general entered, his presence filling the room. He carried a thick folder stamped with the Marine Corps seal. "Judge Harrison, we've got some things to discuss about Colonel McKinley. And I've got the Commandant of the Marine Corps on standby." Seems we have 40 years of oversight to correct." Doc Wilson smiled, a fierce light in his old eyes. "The Colonel taught us something crucial in '68, sir. You never leave a man behind. Not in combat, not in peace. Not ever." "No," Harrison agreed, remembering that night in the jungle. "You don't." Outside his window he could see more veterans, arriving, many in their old uniforms or wearing Marine Corps pins and patches. They moved with purpose, with the quiet discipline McKinley had instilled in them so long ago. The weight of command, McKinley had taught him, meant carrying responsibility for your men. But sometimes, Harrison realized, it also meant letting them carry you when you fell. Tomorrow, when Colonel James McKinley returned to court, he wouldn't be standing alone. An army of brothers was gathering, ready to lift the weight he'd carried, silently for so long. The mission, as Sergeant Major O'Brien had said, was about to be completed. The small town of Milton hadn't seen this much activity since the flood of '98. News vans lined Main Street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. Local coffee shops buzzed with debate, while social media exploded with conflicting opinions about the McKinley situation. At the Crown Diner, where it had all started, owner Maria Rodriguez defended her longtime customer. "Colonel McKinley's been coming here for 15 years, she told a local reporter, her voice fierce with loyalty. "Every Tuesday night, he sits with broken veterans, men nobody else will talk to, buys them coffee, listens to their stories. Those boys who attacked him, they didn't just assault a man, they disrupted a healing circle." But not everyone shared her perspective. Outside the courthouse, a small group of protesters held signs reading "No special treatment" and "Law applies to everyone." Their leader, City Councilman James Porter, had been vocal in his opposition. "Military service doesn't excuse criminal behavior," Porter told anyone who would listen. "We can't have vigilantes taking the law into their own hands, regardless of their past accomplishments." The divide grew deeper as more details of McKinley's service emerged. Local veterans groups organized counter-protests, their numbers swelling as Marines from neighboring states arrived. The street outside the courthouse became a sea of military caps and patches, with aging Vietnam veterans standing shoulder to shoulder with young Afghanistan and Iraq war soldiers. At Milton High School, where McKinley had worked as a janitor, students were taking sides. Many remembered the quiet old man who had kept their halls clean, never complaining, never seeking attention. Now they learned he was a war hero, and their perspectives shifted dramatically. "He used to help me with my homework," said Jenny Martinez, a senior. "I was struggling with history, especially the Vietnam War unit. He never mentioned he was there, just helped me understand the human cost of conflict. Now I know why he could explain it so well." The school's principal, Dr. Sarah Chen, made a controversial decision to hold an assembly about veterans' issues. "Our students are watching how we treat those who served," she explained to angry parents. "Colonel McKinley spent years in these halls, invisible but essential. What message do we send if we turn our backs on him now?" Local businesses found themselves caught in the crossfire. Those displaying "Support McKinley" signs faced boycotts from one side, while those remaining neutral faced criticism from the other. The town's social fabric, already strained by modern political divisions, threatened to tear completely. At the public library, reference librarian Tom Wheeler couldn't keep up with requests for information about Vietnam, PTSD, and military law. "People want to understand," he said, organizing yet another display about military history. "They're realizing there are veterans all around us, carrying invisible wounds, fighting battles we never see." The tension reached its peak when the three young men who'd attacked McKinley made a public statement on the courthouse steps. Their lawyer had advised against it, but the youngest, Jake Peterson, insisted. "We were wrong," he said, his arm still in a cast. "We didn't just attack an old man, we attacked everything he represents. My grandfather was a Marine. He's been crying since he found out who we hurt. I've never seen him cry before." The media circus grew as national news outlets picked up the story. Forgotten hero or vigilante veteran? Asked one headline. American. Justice on trial, declared another. Pundits debated the broader implications for veterans' rights, while military advocacy groups seized the moment to highlight systematic failures in veteran care. Through it all, Colonel McKinley remained in his cell, declining interviews, maintaining the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout his life. But his silence spoke volumes to those who understood. At the local VFW Hall, now serving as an impromptu headquarters for McKinley's supporters, Vietnam veteran Frank Torres summed up the situation. This ain't just about one Marine or one fight in a diner. This is about who we are as a nation. Do we honor our promises? Do we take care of our own? Or do we just talk about respect while letting our heroes sweep floors and fade away? As the sun set on another tense day in Milton, the division in the town mirrored a larger national conversation. Social media hashtags multiplied. Justice for McKinley competed with no one above the law, while remember our veterans trended alongside. Soastushwar, rule of law matters. Tomorrow Colonel McKinley would return to court. But now his case carried the weight of something larger, a referendum on America's treatment of its veterans, a test of justice's ability to balance law with honor, and a moment of truth for a small town forced to confront its own prejudices and principles. The classified files arrived at Judge Harrison's chambers in a diplomatic pouch, hand-delivered by a Marine Corps courier. The folder's edges were worn, its pages yellowed with age, but the top-secret stamp remained sharp and clear after all these years. General Thompson sat across from Harrison's desk as they reviewed the contents. "This is the complete Silver Star citation," the general explained, carefully removing a document protected by a plastic sleeve. What was released publicly in '68 was heavily redacted. The full version explains why Colonel McKinley's actions that night changed the course of the war. Harrison leaned forward, reading the previously classified details. His hands trembled slightly as the full scope of McKinley's heroism became clear. The 23 men he saved, General Thompson continued, included 3 intelligence officers carrying crucial information about North Vietnamese supply routes. If they'd been captured or killed, the entire offensive strategy for the next 6 months would have been compromised. Thousands more lives could have been lost. But the Silver Star citation was just the beginning. The folder contained mission reports spanning 2 decades, each revealing another layer of McKinley's service. Covert operations in Cambodia, advisory missions in Latin America, counter-terrorism operations that remained classified even now. "Look at this," General Thompson said, pointing to a particular document. December 1975. McKinley led an unauthorized rescue mission into Laos to extract 3 American prisoners of war who'd been left behind. Official records listed them as killed in action, but he never believed it. Spent 6 months tracking leads. In his spare time, did he find them? Harrison asked. The general nodded grimly. Brought all 3 out alive. But because the mission wasn't sanctioned, he was nearly court-martialed. They gave him a choice: accept a quiet commendation and never speak of it, or face charges for violating direct orders. "Let me guess," Harrison said. He took the silence. Always did. Man carried more secrets than a confessional. But here's what's really interesting. Thompson pulled out a series of photographs. These men he saved, they all went on to remarkable things. One became a senator. Another's running a Fortune 500 company. The third founded a non-profit helping homeless veterans. None of them knew who saved them. McKinley never told. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Chen entered, her expression urgent. "Sir, the Pentagon's Judge Advocate General is on a secure line. They've found something in McKinley's file that changes everything." The JAG officer's voice crackled through the speakerphone, laying out a story that seemed almost impossible. McKinley's original service records had been deliberately buried, marked classified not for national security, but to protect powerful people who tried to stop his rescue missions. He embarrassed them, the JAG officer explained. Every unauthorized rescue, every rule he broke to save another life, it made the bureaucrats look bad. Easier to hide his records than admit they'd abandoned Americans while he was still trying to save them. General Thompson's face darkened with anger. So, they buried his paperwork, made it impossible for him to prove his service, left him struggling for basic benefits while pencil pushers protected their careers. There's more, the JAG officer continued. We found a memo from 1980. McKinley was nominated for the Medal of Honor. The nomination included sworn statements from 37 witnesses to his actions during multiple operations. But it never reached the review board. Someone made it disappear. Harrison thought about McKinley in his prison jumpsuit, standing silently in court while people whispered and laughed. The same silence he'd maintained for decades, carrying the weight of classified operations and abandoned comrades. "General," he said quietly, "how quickly can you get the current Commandant of the Marine Corps here?" "He's already on his way, Your Honor, along with the Secretary of the Navy and 3 Medal of Honor recipients who served with McKinley. This isn't just about correcting a record anymore. This is about restoring honor to the Corps itself." Sarah Chen, who'd been taking notes, looked up. "Sir, the media is going to want to know about all of this." "Not yet," Harrison decided. "First, we need to talk to Colonel McKinley. He's carried these secrets for 40 years. He deserves to decide how they come out." General Thompson stood, gathering the classified files. "There's something else you should know, Judge. Those 3 young men McKinley supposedly assaulted, we did some digging. Turns out they were hired to provoke him. Someone wanted him in court, wanted him humiliated. But why? Because next month the Senate Armed Services Committee is holding hearings on abandoned POW rescue operations. McKinley was about to be subpoenaed as a witness. Somebody wanted to destroy his credibility before he could testify." Harrison stared at the Silver Star citation, at the photographs of rescued men who'd never known their savior's name. Tomorrow, Colonel James McKinley would return to his courtroom. But this time, the judge had more than just law on his side. He had truth, long buried but finally unearthed, and an entire Marine Corps ready to stand with one of their own. The truth about the diner incident unraveled quickly once the FBI began investigating. Special Agent Rebecca Chen, no relation to the judge's clerk, laid out the evidence in Harrison's chambers, her precise words cutting through weeks of misconception. "We have audio recordings," she explained, spreading photographs across the desk. "The 3 men who attacked Colonel McKinley were hired by this man." She tapped a surveillance photo of a well-dressed individual entering a downtown office building. "Senator Howard Wells. He's on the Armed Services Committee and has some interesting connections to those abandoned POW missions." Harrison studied the photograph. "The same senator who's been vocal about McKinley's arrest being proof that veterans need more psychological supervision, not more benefits?" "The very same," Agent Chen confirmed. "We found transfers from a shell company linked to Wells into the attackers' bank accounts. Each received $10,000. The plan was simple: provoke the colonel into a violent response, film it, destroy his credibility before the Senate hearings." Sarah Chen, who'd been quietly taking notes, spoke up, but they didn't count on his training. "The colonel didn't lose control at all, did he?" The FBI agent shook her head, pulling out an enhanced version of the diner's security footage. Frame by frame, it showed McKinley's precise, measured response. Every move defensive, every action calculated to neutralize the threat with minimal force. "Watch his eyes," Agent Chen said, freezing a particular frame. He spotted the hidden camera they were using. "See how he positions himself? He made sure everything he did would be clearly recorded." The colonel knew he was being set up. The revelation hit Harrison like a physical blow. Even in the midst of an attack, McKinley had maintained his tactical awareness, his discipline. He'd turned their trap into evidence of his innocence and then sat silently in jail, waiting for the truth to emerge. The young men who'd attacked him were now cooperating with the FBI. Jake Peterson, the one with the broken arm, had provided a full confession. Agent Chen played part of his recorded statement. The senator's aide said it would be easy money. Just push the old man around, get him to snap. They said he was unstable, dangerous. But you know what? When it happened, when we were actually hitting him, he looked at me with such pity, like he was sorry for me. That's when my arm got broken, but it wasn't from him attacking. I fell when he blocked my punch. He actually tried to catch me before I hit the ground. Maria Rodriguez, the diner's owner, had provided her own security recordings, including audio, that the attackers hadn't known about. It captured McKinley's only words during the incident. "Stand down, son. You don't want to carry this weight." District Attorney Eleanor Martinez stood by the window, her face troubled, as she listened to the evidence. "We're dropping all charges, obviously, but that's not enough, is it? This goes beyond a simple assault case." "Much beyond," agreed Agent Chen. "Senator Wells isn't just trying to silence Colonel McKinley, he's trying to bury 40 years of systemic failures. The POW missions that were abandoned, the rescue operations that were denied, the veterans who were left behind. McKinley's testimony could expose it all." Harrison thought about the classified files General Thompson had shared about the lives McKinley had saved against direct orders. He never stopped trying to bring them home, did he? Even when they tried to court-martial him for it? Never. Agent Chen confirmed. "We found recent surveillance photos in Wells's office. The colonel at VA hospitals, visiting veterans' homes, attending funerals of men he'd served with. He's still keeping watch over his men, still fighting the same battle." Sarah Chen had pulled up McKinley's VA records on her laptop. "Look at this pattern. Every time he appealed his benefits denial, every time he came close to getting his full disability rating, something would happen. Papers would go missing, records would be accidentally deleted. Because a decorated colonel fighting for veterans, rights is one thing," Harrison said slowly, "but a homeless veteran with documented PTSD? Who would believe him over a senator?" The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture that made Harrison's judicial blood boil. They'd tried to destroy McKinley's credibility, his dignity, his very identity. But they'd failed to understand something fundamental about the man they were attacking. "Agent Chen," Harrison said, "how quickly can you get this evidence before a grand jury?" "Already in motion, Your Honor. But there's something else you should know." She pulled out one final document. "We found this in Wells's private safe. It's a list of other veterans who were systematically denied benefits, their records buried, their appeals blocked. Hundreds of names." Harrison looked at the list, remembering McKinley's words from so long ago. "The wait doesn't end when the fighting stops." "No," he said quietly. "But neither does the fight." He turned to the district attorney. "Ms. Martinez, I believe we need to have a conversation about turning my courtroom into a venue for something larger than a simple assault case. These men have waited 40 years for justice. They won't wait another day." Outside the courthouse, veterans continued to gather, their numbers growing hour by hour. They didn't know yet what was coming, but they could sense it. The moment when truth would finally outweigh politics, when honor would overcome expedience. The weight was about to shift. In his jail cell, Colonel James McKinley sat on the edge of his thin mattress, writing in a small notebook the guards had allowed him to keep. His handwriting was precise, measured, the same way he'd written letters to fallen soldiers' families decades ago. But these weren't letters, they were names. Every night, he wrote them all down. Every Marine he'd served with, every life touched, every soul carried in his memory. Officer Jenkins, the night guard, watched through the cell window. He'd been observing this ritual for weeks now, curious about the old man who never complained, never demanded special treatment, never acted like anything other than what he appeared to be, a warrior at peace with his circumstances. "Colonel," Jenkins called softly, "you have a visitor." McKinley looked up, closing his notebook carefully. Chaplain Robert Morgan, a fellow Vietnam veteran and longtime friend, stepped into view. The guards had made a special exception for this late-night visit, understanding something fundamental about the brotherhood they were witnessing. "Been a while, James," the chaplain said, settling onto the metal stool outside the cell. "The men are gathering. Hundreds of them now. They remember what you taught them." McKinley's weathered face showed no reaction, but his eyes softened slightly. They shouldn't trouble themselves. This isn't their burden to carry. That's not what you taught us in '68, Morgan countered. Remember what you said after Crimson. Strike? A Marine's honor isn't measured by what he carries alone, but by what he helps others bear. The colonel's hands, steady now, opened the notebook. I write their names every night, Robert. All of them. The ones we saved, the ones we lost, even the ones who tried to hurt me at the diner. Everyone carries weight of some kind. Morgan leaned forward. They found out about the POW missions. James, about the men you brought home when everyone else had given up. The classified files are open now. For the first time, a flicker of concern crossed McKinley's face. Those men deserve their privacy. Their families never knew how close they came to being left behind. Better it stays buried. Like your Silver Star citation, your Medal of Honor nomination, the 40 years of benefits they cheated you out of. Morgan's voice carried an edge of righteous anger. You taught us about honor, about never leaving anyone behind. But you've been letting them bury you alive with silence. McKinley stood, moving to the cell window. Beyond the jail walls, he could see the glow of flashlights where veterans kept their vigil in the courthouse square. You know why I never fought back against the system, Robert? Because fighting for benefits, for recognition, it would have meant using my service for personal gain. What we did over there, the lives we saved, the brothers we lost, that wasn't about medals or money. No, Morgan agreed. It was about duty. The same duty that made you spend your disability checks on coffee for struggling veterans at the diner. The same duty that kept you cleaning school hallways with quiet dignity while bureaucrats buried your records. The colonel turned back to his notebook. When I took those boys down at the diner, I knew what they were doing. Saw the camera, recognized the setup. Could have ended it differently, made sure they couldn't get back up. But that's not what we're about, is it? No, sir, Morgan said softly. You taught us better than that. McKinley's fingers traced the names in his notebook. Every night in this cell, I remember, not just the battles, but the moments between. Teaching young Marines how to write letters home, holding them when the nightmares came, showing them that strength isn't about domination, it's about carrying weight with grace. And now it's time to let others help carry yours, Morgan insisted. The truth's coming out, James, all of it. The senator who tried to destroy you, the conspiracy to hide the POW rescues, the systematic denial of veterans' rights. You can't protect them from this knowledge anymore. The colonel closed his notebook gently. Was never trying to protect them from knowledge, Robert. Was protecting them from guilt. This country? It needs to believe it never leaves anyone behind. The truth about those abandoned missions, about how many times we had to disobey orders to save our own, that's a heavy weight for a nation to carry. But a necessary one, Morgan countered. You taught us that too. Truth salutes higher than rank. Remember? A ghost of a smile crossed McKinley's face. You memorized all my old sayings, didn't you? We all did, sir. And now there's a new generation out there, learning them too. Veterans from Iraq, Afghanistan, they're standing watch tonight, carrying your example forward. The wait doesn't end, but neither does the legacy. Officer Jenkins appeared again. Time's up, Chaplain. McKinley returned to his bunk, picking up his pen. More names to write, more memories to honor. But now, perhaps, it was time to add new ones, the names of those who stood vigil in the dark, carrying forward a code of honor that no cell could contain. Morgan watched his old commander begin his nightly ritual. Semper Fi, Colonel. Semper Fi, Chaplain, and Robert. Thank you for remembering. We all remember, sir. Every lesson, every example, every weight you taught us to carry. Tomorrow, we carry it together. The meeting room in the county jail was usually reserved for attorneys and their clients, but today it served a different purpose. Judge Michael Harrison sat at the metal table, his robes replaced by a civilian suit, waiting for the man he'd last seen in a Vietnamese jungle 4 decades ago. When the guards brought McKinley in, Harrison almost didn't recognize him. The proud Marine colonel had been replaced by a man aged not just by years, but by the weight of unspoken burdens. Yet those eyes, they hadn't changed. They still held the same quiet strength that had once guided 23 men to safety through enemy fire. "Lieutenant," McKinley said softly, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Or should I say, Your Honor, now." "Just Michael today, sir." Harrison gestured to the chair across from him. "We have a lot to talk about." McKinley sat with military precision, his orange jumpsuit a jarring contrast to his dignified bearing. "The night guards have been talking, said there's quite a crowd gathering outside." "More than a crowd, Colonel. It's an army, your army. The men you saved, the lives you touched, they're all coming home." Harrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew the worn photograph he'd carried for 40 years. "Do you remember this?" McKinley studied the image, his weathered fingers tracing the faces of young Marines forever frozen in time. 2 days after Crimson Strike, Rodriguez had just gotten that camera in a care package. "Wanted to document everything?" He paused, looking up. "You kept this all these years?" "Carried it every day," Harrison confirmed. "To remind me of what real leadership looks like, what it means to carry the weight of command with honor." Sick. Colonel's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "You did well for yourself, Lieutenant. A federal judge, respected in your community. You carried the weight. Because you showed me how." Harrison leaned forward. "We know everything now, sir. About the POW rescues, the classified missions, the conspiracy to bury your records. Senator Wells's attempt to discredit you before you could testify." For the first time, McKinley showed a hint of concern. "Those missions were classified for a reason, Michael. The families of those POWs, they built lives believing their loved ones died in combat. Learning they were abandoned, that official rescue attempts were called off while politicians debated costs." "They deserve the truth," Harrison interrupted gently, "just like the veterans whose benefits were denied, whose records were buried, whose sacrifices were hidden to protect political careers. You taught me that honor demands truth, no matter the cost." McKinley stood, moving to the narrow window. Outside, he could see the glow of hundreds of candles in the gathering dusk. "You know why I never fought the benefits denials? Never pushed back when they buried my records?" He turned back to Harrison. "Because the moment I did, it would become about me, about medals and money and recognition. What we did over there, the lives we saved, the brothers we lost, that wasn't about glory." "No," Harrison agreed. "It was about duty. The same duty that made you spend your disability checks on coffee for struggling veterans. The same duty that kept you cleaning school hallways with quiet dignity while bureaucrats buried your history." The colonel returned to his seat. "The boys at the diner, they were just following orders, like we once did, until we learned there are higher orders than the ones that come from men with stars on their shoulders." "They've confessed everything," Harrison said. "The setup, the hidden camera, Wells's involvement. But you knew, didn't you? You could have ended that fight differently." "Could have," McKinley acknowledged. "But what lesson would that teach them? That violence solves problems? That power equals right? No. Better to show them that true strength lies in restraint." Harrison pulled out another document, the newly unsealed Silver Star citation. "There's going to be a hearing tomorrow. Not just about the diner incident, but about everything. 40 years of buried truth coming to light. The Commandant of the Marine Corps himself is flying in. The truth can be a heavy burden," McKinley observed quietly. "So can silence," Harrison countered. "You taught us that every burden becomes lighter when shared. Remember what you told me the night after Crimson Strike? A leader's strength isn't in what he carries alone, but in what he helps others bear." For a long moment, McKinley was silent, his gaze distant. Finally, he spoke. "You know what I remember most about that night, Lieutenant? Not the firefight, not the explosions. I remember the look in your eyes when I told you to lead the men out. The same look I see now, a good man wrestling with the weight of responsibility. Tomorrow," Harrison said, standing, "we carry it together, all of us, every Marine who's gathered outside, every veteran who's been denied justice, every soul who needs to know that honor still matters in this world." McKinley rose as well, military-bearing automatic even in prison clothes. "You really think one courtroom can hold 40 years of truth?" Harrison smiled. "No, sir, but it can open the door. After that, well, you taught us what to do with open doors, didn't you?" "Secure the objective," McKinley quoted, the ghost of his old command voice returning. "And leave no one behind." "Never leave anyone behind," Harrison echoed. "Tomorrow, Colonel, we bring everyone home." The courthouse had never seen a day quite like this. Marine Corps honor guards stood at attention by every entrance. Television cameras lined the street. The gallery was packed with veterans, many in dress uniforms spanning conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan. In the front row, 3 Medal of Honor recipients sat ramrod straight, their presence lending gravity to the proceedings. Judge Harrison entered not through his usual private door, but through the main entrance, his robes flowing as he strode to the bench. The customary "all rise" seemed almost superfluous. Everyone was already standing, the tension in the room electric. "Bring in the defendant," Harrison ordered, his voice carrying the weight of both judicial authority and personal history. Colonel McKinley entered in his orange jumpsuit, but his bearing transformed the prison garb into something resembling a uniform. He moved with quiet dignity to the defense table, where his court-appointed attorney sat beside an unexpected addition, the Marine Corps Judge Advocate General himself in full-dress blues. District Attorney Eleanor Martinez rose first. "Your Honor, in light of new evidence, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Colonel James McKinley, with prejudice." But before Harrison could respond, the massive courtroom door swung open. The Commandant of the Marine Corps entered, flanked by General Thompson and a team of military officials. The gallery rose again, instinctively responding to the presence of the Corps' highest-ranking officer. "Your Honor," the Commandant said, "the United States Marine Corps requests permission to address this court on a matter of national importance." Harrison nodded. "Permission granted, Commandant." The Commandant moved to the center of the courtroom, his stars glinting under the fluorescent lights. "This court and this nation owe Colonel James McKinley more than the mere dismissal of false charges. We owe him 40 years of recognition, honor, and justice." He gestured, and an aide brought forward a leather briefcase. What happened in that diner was no random incident. It was the latest in a 4-decade campaign to silence a man whose only crime was refusing to leave his fellow Marines behind. The Commandant opened the briefcase, removing a stack of newly declassified documents. Between 1975 and 1980, Colonel McKinley conducted 7 unauthorized rescue operations into denied territory. He saved 28 American servicemen who had been officially declared dead, men who would have been abandoned if he had followed orders instead of his conscience. A murmur ran through the gallery. The Commandant continued, his voice rising with controlled anger. These rescues were buried, classified not for national security, but to hide the fact that official rescue attempts had been called off. Colonel McKinley's records were deliberately obscured. His medals were denied. His disability claims were systematically blocked. The JAG officer stood, adding his own authority to the proceedings. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Senator Howard Wells and others conspired to prevent Colonel McKinley from testifying before Congress about abandoned POW rescue operations. The assault in the diner was a coordinated attempt to destroy his credibility." Harrison's gaze swept the courtroom, settling on McKinley, who sat as straight and steady as he had in combat. "Colonel McKinley, please rise." The old Marine stood, and something in his posture made everyone in the room see past the prison jumpsuit to the warrior beneath. "This court," Harrison declared, "finds that not only are the assault charges without merit, but they represent a grave miscarriage of justice. The charges are dismissed with prejudice." He paused, then added, "But we're not finished." The Commandant stepped forward again. "Colonel James McKinley, by order of the President of the United States, you are hereby awarded the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your life above and beyond the call of duty." The gallery erupted in applause, but Harrison's gavel cut through the noise. "Moreover, this court is ordering an immediate review of all veterans' benefits cases handled by Senator Wells's office. Every denied claim, every buried record will be reopened." The JAG officer rose again. The Marine Corps is prepared to present evidence of systematic discrimination against veterans who served in classified operations. We request this court's jurisdiction in establishing a special tribunal to review these cases. Granted, Harrison said without hesitation. And Colonel McKinley will be the first witness. McKinley finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the courtroom. Your Honor, the men I brought home, their families have built lives around believing they died in combat. This truth, it will change everything for them. Yes, Harrison agreed, it will. But you taught me something once, Colonel. You said the weight of command includes the burden of truth. These families deserve to know their loved ones weren't forgotten, that one Marine refused to leave them behind. The Commandant moved to McKinley's side. It's time to come home, Colonel. All the way home. As if on cue, the honor guard moved forward, one carrying a garment bag containing a freshly pressed dress blue uniform with full medals. Another held a folded American flag. Harrison stood. This court is in recess until tomorrow, when we will begin hearing testimony about 40 years of buried truth. But first, he stepped down from the bench, approaching McKinley. Colonel, you've carried this weight alone long enough. It's our turn now. The gallery rose as one, hundreds of veterans standing at attention. Outside, the crowd that had gathered in the square began to sing the Marine Corps hymn, its notes floating through the courtroom windows like a benediction. The weight was finally being lifted, one truth at a time. Dawn broke over Milton with the sound of helicopters. 4 Marine Corps CH-53s thundered over the courthouse, their arrival heralding a day unlike any the small town had ever seen. The square, normally home to farmers' markets and local festivals, had been transformed into a military parade ground overnight. By 7 a.m., the streets were already packed. Veterans who had driven through the night from across the country stood shoulder to shoulder with local residents who had once passed. Colonel McKinley, without a second glance, the high school band hastily assembled for the occasion, practiced the Marine Corps hymn under the direction of a Marine Corps band conductor who had volunteered his services. Inside the Crown Diner, Maria Rodriguez supervised a team of volunteers, preparing thousands of free coffee cups and meals for the gathering crowd. The walls of her establishment, once bare, save for a few local photos, now displayed enlarged copies of McKinley's recently declassified mission photos. The booth, where the setup had occurred, was marked with a simple brass plaque. Honor stands here. He sat right there every Tuesday for 15 years, Maria told a reporter, her eyes glistening, buying coffee for broken men, listening to their stories, carrying their weight. We just didn't know he was carrying so much of his own. At the high school, Principal Sarah Chen addressed an emergency assembly. Many of you knew Mr. McKinley as our janitor, she said, her voice echoing through the gymnasium. Today, you'll learn who he really is, and more importantly, who we are as a community that let him sweep our floors while carrying the Medal of Honor in his heart. The students listened in stunned silence as she read from McKinley's recently unsealed service record. When she finished, Senior Class President Jenny Martinez stood up. We want to do something, she announced. Something to make sure no veteran is ever invisible in our town again. By 9 a.m., the transformation of Milton was visible everywhere. American flags appeared on every lamppost. Shop windows displayed hastily made signs, "Welcome home, Colonel McKinley," and "Thank you for not leaving them behind." The protesters who had once called for his imprisonment now stood quietly at the back of the crowd, their signs replaced by looks of shame and revelation. The ceremony was scheduled for noon, but the real show began an hour earlier. From every direction, motorcycles roared into town, the Patriot Guard riders, veterans motorcycle clubs, and countless individual riders. They formed a corridor of chrome and steel leading to the courthouse steps. At 11:30, the 3 young men who had been part of the diner setup approached the stage. Jake Peterson, his arm still in a cast, carried a folded Marine Corps flag. They had asked for this moment insisted on it despite their lawyers' objections. We were wrong, Peterson announced to the crowd, his voice breaking We were paid to hurt a hero, and we'll carry that shame forever. But Colonel McKinley, he taught us something even in that moment. He showed us what real strength looks like. The Commandant of the Marine Corps arrived with full escort, accompanying a group of elderly men who moved with deliberate care. The men he rescued whispered through the crowd, the ones they said were dead. Their families, who had only learned the truth days ago, stood nearby, decades of grief, transforming into a complex mix of joy and anger. At precisely noon, Colonel James McKinley emerged from the courthouse. He wore his dress blues now, the uniform fitting as perfectly as it had 40 years ago. The Medal of Honor hung from his neck, its blue ribbon stark against the dark fabric, but it was his face that caught everyone's attention. The quiet dignity remained, but the weight of secrecy had lifted. Judge Harrison, also in dress uniform rather than his judicial robes, stood at attention as McKinley descended the steps. Neither man spoke. They didn't need to. 4 decades of carried weight passed between their eyes. The high school band struck up the Marine Corps hymn, and something remarkable happened. Every Marine present, from the Commandant to the youngest veteran, began to sing. The sound rolled across the square like thunder, picking up voices as it went. Even those who didn't know the words stood straighter, feeling the weight of history. In the moment, Maria Rodriguez made her way through the crowd, carrying a silver coffee pot and a single cup. She approached McKinley, tears streaming down her face. "Your usual seat will always be ready, Colonel," she said, pouring him a cup with trembling hands. "But now, everyone will know who's sitting there." The Colonel accepted the cup with a slight smile, the same one he'd worn on countless Tuesday nights while listening to troubled veterans. But today, he wasn't just carrying their weight. He was showing them how to stand tall beneath it. The transformation wasn't just about one man or one ceremony. It was about a community waking up to the invisible heroes in their midst, about the weight of recognition finally balancing the weight of service. As the last notes of the hymn faded, McKinley turned to face the crowd. The weight of 40 years of silence lifted from his shoulders like a heavy pack being set down after a long march. It was time to tell the truth, all of it, and trust that his nation was strong enough to carry it. The Commandant of the Marine Corps stood at the podium, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. For 40 years, the full story of Colonel James McKinley's service remained hidden. Today, we correct that oversight. Today, we honor not just his courage in combat, but his dedication to never leaving anyone behind, even when ordered to do so. The official citation seemed to echo off the courthouse walls for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Each word carried the weight of decades, each phrase illuminating another facet of McKinley's hidden service. But it was the unofficial stories that moved the crowd most deeply. A gray-haired man in a wheelchair made his way to the microphone. One of the POWs McKinley had rescued against orders. "They told our families we were dead," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Declared us killed in action because it was easier than mounting a rescue. But Colonel McKinley, he never stopped looking. Spent his leave time tracking leads, used his own money to buy information. When he found us, he didn't wait for permission. Just came in with a handful of volunteers and brought us home." Another veteran stepped forward, this one younger, from a more recent conflict. "I met the colonel at the diner," he said. Didn't know who he was. None of us did. But every Tuesday night, he'd sit there listening to us talk about our struggles. PTSD, homeless vets, suicide attempts. He carried our weight when the system failed us. Used his disability checks to buy us coffee, help with rent, get guys into rehab. Never told us about his own battles. The 3 young men who had been part of the setup approached the podium next. Jake Peterson's voice shook as he spoke. "We were paid to destroy this man's reputation. But even when we attacked him, he showed us what real strength looks like. He could have hurt us badly, had every right to. Instead, he protected us even while defending himself. That's the kind of hero we tried to tear down." McKinley sat quietly through it all, his posture straight, but his eyes distant, perhaps seeing other faces, other moments when the weight of command had forced impossible choices. When he finally rose to speak, the square fell so silent you could hear the flag snapping in the breeze. "The weight of command," he began, his voice soft but carrying, "isn't about medals or rank or glory. It's about the promises we make to our nation, to our brothers in arms, to ourselves." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. "When they told us to stop looking for POWs, to accept that some men had to be left behind, I remembered a night in 1968 when 23 Marines trusted me to lead them home. The weight of that trust doesn't end when the war does. He turned to face the families of the men he'd rescued, their faces still struggling with the revelation that their loved ones hadn't died as officially reported. "I carry your pain too," he said. "The years you grieved needlessly, the lies you were told. That weight belongs to all of us now. The weight of truth too long hidden." His gaze found the veterans from the diner, the ones who'd shared their burdens with him every Tuesday night. "You taught me something crucial," he told them, "that the weight of command isn't just about leading men in battle. It's about standing with them in peace, especially when the system fails them. Every story you shared, every burden you carried, you showed the same courage I once saw in combat." Then he addressed the young men who had attacked him. "You were used as weapons. Against the truth," he said, "compassion replacing judgment. But remember this, true strength isn't in how hard you can strike, but in knowing when not to strike at all." Finally, he turned to Judge Harrison. "Lieutenant," he said, using the old rank, "you asked me once about the weight of command. Now you know it never ends, but it gets lighter when we carry it together." The commandant stepped forward with the Medal of Honor, but McKinley raised his hand. "This medal," he said, "belongs to every Marine who ever volunteered for a rescue. Mission against orders. To every veteran who helps another veteran stand tall. To every American who refuses to accept that some must be left behind." He looked out over the crowd one last time, his voice gaining strength. "The weight of truth can be heavy, the weight of silence, heavier still. But the weight of abandoning our own, that's a burden none of us should ever agree to carry." The Marine Corps hymn began again, spontaneously, rolling across the square like thunder. McKinley stood at attention, the Medal of Honor catching the sunlight, no longer a secret weight, but a visible symbol of a promise kept. The ceremony would end, but its impact was just beginning. In the crowd, phones recorded every word. Social. Media spread the story across the nation, and in Washington, legislators began drafting what would become known as the McKinley Act, ensuring no veteran service could ever again be buried for political convenience. The weight of command had finally found its balance in the weight of truth revealed. 6 months after the ceremony, Milton had transformed into something unprecedented, a model for how communities could support their veterans. The changes started small but spread like ripples in a pond, touching every aspect of town life. The Crown Diner became the unofficial headquarters for veteran support in the region. Maria Rodriguez, with help from anonymous donors, expanded the building to include a dedicated meeting space. Every Tuesday night, just as before, veterans gathered to share their stories. But now, instead of one quiet man buying coffee and carrying their weight alone, an entire community stood ready to help. The McKinley Room, as the new space was called, housed a full-time veteran service officer who helped navigate the bureaucracy of benefits claims. The walls displayed photographs and citations, not just of Colonel McKinley, but of every local veteran who had served. It was a living museum of service and sacrifice, ensuring no hero would ever again fade into invisibility. Jenny Martinez, the high school senior who had spoken up at the assembly, started a program that spread to schools across the country. Veterans Among Us taught students to recognize and honor service members in their community. The school janitor's closet where McKinley had once stored his mops became a memorial, its walls covered with letters from students who had learned the truth about the quiet man who had kept their halls clean. "Dear Colonel McKinley," one letter read, I used to walk past you every day without really seeing you. Now I understand that heroes don't always wear uniforms or medals. Sometimes they carry mops and other people's burdens. You taught us to look deeper." The three young men who had been part of the setup found their own path to redemption. Jacob Peterson, once he recovered from his broken arm, enlisted in the Marine Corps. "The colonel showed me what real strength looks like," he told his recruiter. "I want to learn to carry weight like he did." Judge Harrison's courtroom became the center of a legal revolution. The special tribunal he established to review buried veteran cases uncovered thousands of similar stories. Decorated soldiers whose records had been classified and forgotten. Benefits denied through bureaucratic manipulation. Heroes reduced to silence by the weight of secrets they had sworn to keep. The McKinley Act, passed with rare bipartisan support, created new protections for veterans who had served in classified operations. It established a secure process for them to prove their service without compromising national security, and mandated regular reviews of classified records to prevent future burial of heroic actions. But perhaps the most profound changes happened in the quiet moments, the small interactions that revealed how deeply McKinley's example had penetrated the community's consciousness. At the grocery store, clerks learned to recognize the subtle signs of PTSD and created a quiet checkout lane with minimal stimulation. The local cinema offered special veteran screenings with adjusted sound and lighting. Restaurants kept honor seats, quiet tables away from crowds and noise, reserved for veterans who needed space to decompress. The high school instituted a new history curriculum that included oral histories from local veterans. Students learned not just about famous battles and political decisions, but about the human cost of war and the ongoing struggle of those who carried its weight home with them. McKinley himself remained characteristically humble about these changes. He returned to the diner every Tuesday night, still buying coffee for troubled veterans, still listening to their stories. But now he also shared his own understanding that his silence, though noble in intent, had allowed others to bury truths that needed to be told. "The weight of command doesn't end with retirement," he told a group of young officers who had come to learn from him. "It evolves. Sometimes it means carrying secrets to protect others. Sometimes it means breaking silence to protect even more." The FBI's investigation into Senator Wells and the conspiracy to bury veteran records expanded into what the media called the Hidden Heroes investigation. Dozens of officials faced charges for their role in systematically denying benefits and hiding evidence of heroism. But McKinley, true to his character, asked for leniency in their sentencing. "They carried the wrong weight," he testified, their trial. "They chose political expediency over honor, bureaucratic convenience over truth. But revenge adds weight without adding wisdom. Better they spend their time helping to uncover other buried heroes." 1 year after the ceremony, the town gathered again in the square. This time, they dedicated a new veterans center built with donated funds and staffed by volunteers. Its mission statement, engraved in bronze, read, "The weight of service never ends. Neither does our commitment to those who carry it." Above the entrance hung a simple plaque with words that had become the town's unofficial motto, "Look deeper. Heroes walk among us. Some carry medals, some carry mops. All carry weight we must help bear." In his small apartment, now filled with letters and photos from grateful veterans and their families, McKinley kept his Medal of Honor in the same shoebox where he had once hidden his other decorations. But he no longer hid the truth of his service or the weight of his experiences. He had learned finally that some weights were meant to be shared, some stories meant to be told, some heroes meant to be seen. The autumn air carried a hint of wood smoke as Colonel McKinley walked through Milton's Veterans Memorial Park. 18 months had passed since the ceremony that changed everything, and he was no longer the invisible janitor or the silent veteran. Instead, he had become something he never expected, a bridge between generations of warriors. Today, he moved with purpose toward the park's new outdoor classroom, where a group of young veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan waited. These weekly meetings had started spontaneously after the ceremony, when younger service members sought him out for guidance. What began as informal conversations evolved into something more profound, a cross-generational exchange of wisdom and understanding. "The nightmares don't care what decade you served in," McKinley told them, settling onto a bench designed for veterans with mobility issues. "PTSD doesn't check your discharge date. The weight feels the same whether you carried it in Vietnam or Kandahar." Among today's group was Marine Sergeant Sarah Collins, recently returned from her third deployment. "We have all this technology now," she said, gesturing with her prosthetic arm. "Drones, satellite communications, immediate medevac. But when things go wrong, when you have to make those split-second decisions about lives and death, it's no different from what you faced, is it, sir?" McKinley smiled gently. "The tools change. The weight doesn't." He looked around the circle. "You know why I spent all those years staying quiet, hiding who I was? I thought the world had moved on, that my experiences weren't relevant anymore. But sitting in that diner every Tuesday, listening to you young warriors, I learned something. Crucial, the fundamental truths of service and sacrifice never become obsolete." The park around them reflected this philosophy of connection. Traditional war memorials stood alongside interactive digital displays where visitors could learn about modern conflicts. QR codes on benches linked to oral histories from veterans of different eras. The design intentionally encouraged interaction between generations, understanding between eras. "You all have smartphones now," McKinley continued, nodding at the devices that occasionally buzzed in the veterans' pockets. "When I was leading missions, we had to rely on hand signals and intuition. But you know what hasn't changed? The weight of command, the responsibility for lives, the cost of decisions." A young Army captain named Marcus Rodriguez, Maria's nephew, spoke up. "That's why we need you, sir. Our generation has all these online support groups, VA apps, virtual therapy sessions. But nothing compares to sitting with someone who truly understands, who's carried the same weight." McKinley had embraced these technological changes in his own way, with help from Jenny Martinez, now a college freshman studying Veterans Affairs. He learned to use video conferencing to reach isolated veterans in rural areas. His Tuesday night discussions at the Crown Diner were now streamed live, with participants' permission, to veteran groups across the country. "The weight of command adapts," he explained to his young audience. "In combat, it's about making decisions that keep your people alive. In peace, it's about helping them live with those decisions. Today's tools let us reach more warriors, carry more weight together." The group's discussion ranged across decades and continents, finding common ground in shared experiences. A young Marine described the guilt of surviving an IED attack. McKinley shared his own story of survivor's guilt after Crimson Strike. A National Guard sergeant talked about struggling with civilian life. McKinley spoke about his years of invisible service as a school janitor. "You know what I've learned from all of you?" McKinley said as the session wound down. "That strength isn't about carrying weight alone, it's about teaching others how to carry their own. Each generation of warriors faces unique challenges, but the core truths remain constant: honor, sacrifice, the obligation to leave no one behind." As if to emphasize his point, a notification pinged on several phones simultaneously. The veteran support app they developed, inspired by McKinley's example, was alerting them to a local veteran in crisis. Without hesitation, the group mobilized. Young and old, Vietnam and Afghanistan veterans, moving with shared purpose. Different tools, McKinley observed, as they coordinated their response through a mixture of old-school phone calls and modern technology. Same mission. Later that evening, after ensuring their fellow veteran was safe and supported, McKinley stood at his familiar spot in the Crown Diner. The Tuesday night group had evolved, now spanning 4 generations of service members. The weight they carried was different. Some bore physical wounds, others invisible scars, but they carried it together. Maria brought him his usual coffee, but now she served it in a special cup, bearing the Marine Corps emblem. "You know what's changed most, Colonel?" she asked. It's not the technology or the methods. It's that no one fights their battles alone anymore. McKinley nodded, watching as young veterans helped older ones navigate smartphone apps, while Vietnam-era soldiers shared time-tested coping strategies. The weight hadn't become lighter, but it had become more evenly distributed, carried by a community that finally understood its obligation to those who served. "Different wars," he murmured. "Same warriors, different tools, same truth." He smiled at a young Marine struggling to explain Twitter to an older veteran. "The weight of command never ends. It just finds new ways to bring us together." 2 years to the day after the courthouse ceremony, Judge Michael Harrison stood in the same square, now transformed into what the townspeople called Veterans Vista. The morning sun caught the bronze letters of the newly installed memorial. The McKinley Doctrine: no one carries weight alone. The occasion was bittersweet. Colonel McKinley had passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 days earlier, his last Tuesday night gathering at the Crown Diner as meaningful as all the others. He had spent his final evening doing what he did best, listening to veterans' stories, sharing wisdom, and ensuring no one fought their battles alone. The funeral procession would have amazed the humble Marine. Thousands of veterans from across the country converged on Milton, their motorcycles thundering down Main Street in a chrome tribute that stretched for miles. The high school band, directed by Jenny Martinez, who had returned as music teacher, played the Marine Corps hymn with perfect precision. Even the 3 young men from the diner incident attended. Jake Peterson, now a Marine sergeant himself, his once broken arm carrying the unit colors. "James McKinley taught us something profound," Harrison began, addressing the assembled crowd. "He showed us that heroism isn't just about moments of dramatic courage. Sometimes it's about the quiet dignity of carrying weight day after day, year after year, helping others stand when their own strength fails." Maria Rodriguez stood near the diner's entrance, her eyes glistening as she looked at Table 7, McKinley's regular spot. The table had been permanently reserved, a small plaque marking it as sacred ground. Every Tuesday night, different veterans would sit there, each taking turns buying coffee for troubled warriors who came seeking guidance. "The colonel never wanted recognition," Harrison continued. "He spent 40 years hiding his medals silently, serving his community, carrying the weight of classified missions and abandoned comrades. But his greatest legacy isn't in the medals we finally gave him or the truths we finally acknowledged. It's in how he changed the way we see each other." The McKinley Act had transformed veteran care across the nation. Special tribunals had uncovered and corrected thousands of buried records. Benefits denied for decades were finally approved. But more importantly, communities everywhere had learned from Milton's example, creating their own support networks, their own systems for ensuring no veteran remained invisible. Sarah Collins, the Marine sergeant with the prosthetic arm, now ran the Veterans Center. "The colonel taught us that weight shared becomes weight halved," she told a documentary crew. "He showed us that true strength isn't in carrying burdens alone, but in helping others carry theirs." The high school curriculum McKinley had inspired spread nationwide. Veterans Among Us became a standard program, teaching students to recognize and honor service members in their communities. The janitor's closet, where he had once stored his mops, became a permanent exhibition showcasing how extraordinary people often hide in ordinary places. Judge Harrison paused in his eulogy, touching the worn photograph he still carried. "The last time I spoke with the colonel, he told me something I'll never forget. He said, 'The weight of command doesn't end with death. It lives on in the examples we set, the lives we touch, the burdens we help others learn to carry.'" The Crown Diner's Tuesday night gatherings continued, now simulcast to veteran groups across the country. Maria had installed a permanent camera system, allowing isolated veterans to join virtually, ensuring McKinley's legacy of connection and support would reach even the most remote warriors. Jake Peterson, standing tall in his dress blues, shared his own testimony. The colonel could have destroyed us that night in the diner. Instead, he showed us what real strength looks like. He taught us that the greatest victory isn't in defeating others, but in helping them find their way back to honor. As the ceremony concluded, Harrison revealed one final tribute. The town council had renamed the courthouse square McKinley Plaza, but with a unique addition. Every bench, every corner, included a QR code linking to resources for veterans in crisis. The technology McKinley had initially struggled with had become a tool for continuing his mission. The colonel once told me that the weight of command never ends, Harrison said, concluding his eulogy. He was right, but he taught us all how to carry it together. In this town, and now in communities across America, no veteran fights alone, no hero fades away, no weight is carried in silence. As if summoned by his words, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the bronze letters of the memorial. In the Crown Diner, Maria placed a fresh cup of coffee at table 7, a small ritual that would be repeated every Tuesday for years to come. The weight of McKinley's legacy, like the weight of command he had carried so long, would be preserved and shared by those he left behind. The Marine Corps hymn began to play, its notes carrying across the square one final time, and in that moment, everyone present understood. Some weights are meant to be carried forever, not as a burden, but as a badge of honor, a reminder that, in the end, we are all responsible for ensuring no one carries their weight alone.